my background is primarily in electronic warfare and in particular navigation warfare. So what I've been doing for the last 10 or 15 years is work around anti-jam and anti-spoof technology, and so basically protecting GPS and GNSS from interference. So the kinds of work I've historically done are adaptive antennas or controlled radiation pattern antennas, which basically can steer nulls in the direction of interfering sources, in other words jammers, and protect GPS in that way. More recently we've been looking at anti-spoof technology, so that's where we can use the same kind of adaptive antenna, so the null steering technology, but which can also target spoofers as well to direct nulls towards spoofers and direct energy towards the satellites, which are the wanted signals. So that's kind of historically the work I've been doing. More recently we've also been involved in augmenting GPS with other technologies, with other resilient PNT technologies. So things like visual and inertial navigation. So we're doing a lot by combining a vision processing system, so a video camera, with inertial technology, and by combining those two together, so using visual odometry to strap down an inertial navigation unit, you can get very robust indoor navigation. And using that technology we've been able to get soldiers to navigate for several miles underground, for instance, and if you could then combine that with GNSS you can have a very robust positioning and navigation solution. And the other thing that's of interest at the moment is, again coming from the background of electronic warfare, is the direction finding and geolocation of interference. So things like direction finding of jammers and of spoofers. So in other words, it's the protect side of things, so being able to police the spectrum. So if there is a spoofing or a jamming incident, it's being able to respond to that very quickly so that authorities can find the jammer or spoofer very quickly and remove it. In terms of priorities for resilient PNT, I think the military have kind of got it sorted in terms of that they have adopted anti-jam and anti-spoof technology to a large degree, and they are also looking at augmenting GNSS with other technologies. The problem lies more in the civilian and mass market domain, where arguably there's a greater problem because they're really behind the curve on uptake of available technology. So things like critical infrastructure is a big concern for people at the moment. But the point is the technology exists to deal with some of these problems. The problem is actually market demand, because people, particularly in the commercial sector, don't want to spend money until they have a real problem. So until there is a large event, such as a large-scale spoofing attack or a large-scale jamming attack that actually causes economic damage, we're not going to see uptake of protection equipment in the commercial sector, and that's a big problem. And I guess that's partly down to lack of market demand, it's partly down to government policy, I suppose. So looking at the session I've just chaired on resilient PNT, I think the big thing that's come out for me is cyber security. There's been a lot of talk for the last 10 or 20 years on the vulnerabilities of GNSS, especially in the RF domain. But what's been lacking is the understanding of the vulnerabilities in I guess what you call the cyber domain, the information assurance domain. And again, that's not really a new problem, but it's only something that people have begun to talk about recently. And again, the answers are there. In terms of cybersecurity, what we're talking about these days is treating GNSS receivers and navigation systems as a whole as more of a computer than a navigation system. And therefore, all the vulnerabilities of computers are inherent in a navigation system. But it's not beyond the wit of man to solve these problems. You know, when computers first started getting viruses and malware, we didn't throw them away and resort to typewriters. We installed virus checkers and put in place firewalls. So all these kind of things are what we need to start thinking about in terms of GNSS.